Varmt välkomna till Mistras konferens om hållbara investeringar. Det är en konferens som vi arrangerar för att celebrera egentligen att vi har haft en 20-årig verksamhet som vi tycker åtminstone har varit framgångsrik. And I will direct in English also a warm welcome to our international guests and speakers. David Blood from Generation and Helen Winch from PRI. And you will also have your personal simultaneous interpreter, so you can follow what is said in Swedish. And interfere, you're most welcome to interfere also. And by that I will turn into Swedish and we check if it works. My name, ja just det, nu var det så blir det ibland. Det jag också skulle säga det var att det faktiskt är premiär. 20 år gammal så kan man ju lätt bli lite åldrande och bekväm av sig. Men vi tänkte så här, vi måste göra något extra av den här jubileumstillställningen. Vi måste börja streama. Så att faktiskt den här konferensen är streamad och vi kommer också ha den på vår YouTube-kanal senare. Och det här är alltså premiär för Mistra med streaming och det är något vi kommer fortsätta med. För en av våra ändamål är ju att försöka sprida våra idéer också. Nu kan jag börja med att säga mitt namn är Åke Irefelt och jag är vd för Mistra sedan nästan ett år tillbaka. Mistra skapades ju löntagarfondsmedel då för 20 år sedan, 1994. Och det finns en väldigt klar ändamål med stiftelsen och det ändamålet lever än idag och det är att vi ska syssla med finansiering av forskning som är av strategisk betydelse för en god livsmiljö. Det här är alltså utdrag ur våra ändamålsparagraf. Och det ska också vara av betydelse för att kunna lösa, det är alltså en lösningsinriktad verksamhet, att kunna lösa prioriterade miljöproblem och kunna bidra till en, som man sa på den tiden, miljöanpassad samhällsutveckling. Jag skulle vilja säga att idag läser vi in en hållbar samhällsutveckling. Men sammantaget kan man säga så är det vi gör, det ska bidra till Sveriges konkurrenskraft. Och tanken är då att det bidraget kan ju komma dels att vi så att säga hjälper industrin att ta fram nya mera miljöanpassade hållbara produkter. Det kan också vara så att vi hjälper Sverige att göra sin röst hörd i internationella sammanhang. Typ på EU-nivå när det gäller miljölagstiftning till exempel. Typ på global nivå när det gäller till exempel klimatförhandlingarna som just nu då faktiskt pågår förhandlingar om i Lima och där vi har ett avsevärt input från Mistra. Och där det handlar ju egentligen om att se till att vårt samhälle får en bra utveckling i en globaliserad värld. Jag vill också beskriva vad Mistra är. Vi är alltså en liten kostnadseffektiv tycker vi också organisation med förhållandevis mycket pengar att distribuera till forskning. Vi är 7 personer på kansliet. Vilket gör att med 15 rullande stora forskningsprogram så har vi fullt upp att göra. Plus att vi ska kommunicera detta. Plus att vi tillsammans med en extern kapitalförvaltningskommitté som vi också har ska förvalta vårt kapital på bästa sätt. Så vi har lite att göra men vi tror också att det här var på sin tid en väldigt unik lösning när man skapade en sån liten organisation med så kraftiga pengamuskler. Och just det här att vi har vårt eget kapital gör oss väldigt unika, i varje fall inom miljöforskningssfären. Att vi faktiskt då kan vi klara av att få en bra avkastning på vårt kapital så kan vi faktiskt finansiera mera miljöforskning som har betydelse för att driva samhället i en hållbar riktning. Och har vi hållbarhetsperspektiv på vår kapitalförvaltning så ser vi också att vi direkt via den kan förstärka våra påverkansmöjligheter genom att vi kan förhoppningsvis påverka investerare och styra sina investeringar i en riktning då som är mer hållbar. Och för det tredje så har vi ju forskningsprogram som ger resultat, och från de resultaten så kan vi alltså extrahera väsentliga godbitar som kan föras in i vår kapitalförvaltning och direkt påverka den i en, vad ska vi säga, så vi hela tiden ligger i fronten. Jag kan ju nämna då att vi hade ett program mellan 2006 och 2012, på den tiden Måns Lönnroth var vd på Mistra, han sitter här längst bak, som hette Sustainable Investments. Vi spenderade över 100 miljoner på det programmet. Och det var också under den tiden så hade man på Mistra under Måns ledning så hade man också något som man kallar Sustainable Platforms, där man möttes mellan forskare och stakeholders för att diskutera hur skulle man driva utvecklingen. Mycket uppskattat och något som vi kommer fortsätta med. Och redan har faktiskt påbörjat. Vi hade ett frukostseminarium här om veckan. Nu har vi också, jag såg Lars Strannegård komma in här från Handelshögskolan, där satt han. Lars och Handelshögskolan har precis fått ett anslag för Mistra för att starta ett centrum kring hållbara marknader. 55 miljoner ligger vi på Handels nu. Och tanken är då att det här ska vara en arvtagare till det förra programmet. Det kommer säkert komma flera sådana här utlysningar som har relevans för så att säga, den ekonomiska utvecklingen och för finansmarknaden. Och det innebär ju att vi kommer ha goda möjligheter att föda in forskningsresultat i våran kapitalförvaltningsmodell som sen då också kan spridas till andra intressenter. Vi tänker också jobba mycket med det här på Europanivå. Sen är det, har vi lyckats då, de här ambitionerna och de här 20 åren, har vi lyckats, om vi tittar på det som kanske ni är mest intresserade av, så är det väl då kanske kapitalförvaltningen då. Ja, vi hade startkapital, vi fick 2,5 miljarder när vi började, och väldigt tidigt då så hade vi som sagt en inriktning, ett hållbarhetsperspektiv på våra placeringar, säg från början av 2000-talet. De där 2,5 miljarderna har gett över 3,5 miljarder som vi har kunnat dela ut i forskningsmedel. Och vi har över 3 miljarder kvar idag att dela ut. Från början var det ju tänkt att Mistra kanske skulle leva 15 år. Senaste prognosen som vi gjorde så är det väl 2025 kanske, 2030 vi kommer leva till med den utbetalningstakt vi har idag på 200 miljoner. Ungefär på 2 nya program per år. Sen för Mistra är ju varje utmaning egentligen är en möjlighet. Och vi vill vara klara över det att till exempel klimatförändringar ger möjligheter. Den så att säga biodiversiteten, hotet mot biodiversiteten ger möjligheter. Och det finns andra möjligheter. Till exempel vi har en mångt och mycket en linjär ekonomi, och det är på en global marknad också. Vi ser ju då en möjlighet att kunna finansiera forskning som driver på då utvecklingen mot en mera cirkulär ekonomi. Vi har ett forskningsprogram, en utlysning nu som stänger här om 15 december som handlar om industridesign på vägen mot en cirkulär ekonomi. Och det här kommer vi nog fortsätta att satsa på, just den cirkulariteten. Vi tror att i ett samhälle som har begränsade resurser så är det här vägen framåt. Andra utmaningar som är möjligheter är urbaniseringen. Det finns otroligt mycket affärsmöjligheter i urbaniseringen. Det finns otroligt mycket miljö- och hållbarhetsutmaningar i detta. Det finns stor anledning att satsa på det. Vi har ett centrum för en urban framtid som har gått nu snart halvtid, som ska utvärderas. Men det här är självklart någonting som är väldigt viktigt för oss och för världen i övrigt. Det ser vi också i FNs kommande sustainability-mål. Och sen handlar det ju om också att vilka lösningar finns som gör att vi kan hålla oss inom det planeten tål. Det här illustrerar ju då liksom med lite extremväder, varmt och vått kan man väl säga. Men kan vi hitta lösningar eller bidra till att hitta lösningar som kan motverka klimatförändringar? Kan vi hitta och bidra till lösningar som kan motverka förlust av biodiversitet, spridning av farliga ämnen och som sagt att försöka hantera det här resursuttaget på ett mera klyftigt sätt. Så tror vi att det här är både nyttigt för Sverige, för svensk industri och så att säga att det också är forskningsbaserat gör att man också kanske kan välja rätt väg framåt. När det gäller just klimatförändringar och lösningar på detta så är vi väldigt aktiva. Det är väldigt aktuellt nu då också i med Lima-förhandlingarna som pågår och Paris som kommer upp nästa år med ett avtal som vi alla hoppas väldigt mycket på. Då. Vi har flera pågående program inom Mistra mot den här riktningen. Och våra forskare är också väldigt aktiva, till exempel att skriva IPCC-rapporten om man varit både huvudförfattare och medförfattare under en lång period av år. Och sen kan jag också nämna att Sveriges klimatambassadör Anna Lindstedt som nu är i Lima och driver de svenska frågorna i den förhandlingen. Hon sitter i i programstyrelsen för ett av våra program. Så det betyder att det här vi vill med vår forskning att det direkt ska göra samhällsnytta. Det gör vi genom att så att säga, ha forskningen intimt kopplat med tillämpningen. Och sen kan jag väl också då avslutningsvis visa det senaste man missar var ju tid. Jag vet på Måns tid så börjar man med något som är att screena olika investeringar, alltså negativ screening men kan man lita på screeningföretagen, screening of screening companies var en skrift som kom 2001 från Mistra. Det vi har tittat på nu det är koldioxidavtryck och vi tittar på våran aktiedelen i portföljen som är ungefär 50% för att titta på om är det här en väg framåt, inte för att visa upp, det här är omslagspappret, det är Nordea som har hjälpt oss med det här med input från Truecost och Generation, men vi ser det som omslagspappret, man måste gå ner bakom här. Det kanske är bara bankaktier som gör att vi har 60% lägre avtryck. Nu är det inte så utan vi har en väldigt diversifierad portfölj över sektorerna. Det här är ett resultat av stockpicking. Men det här är också grunden för en diskussion med våra förvaltare. Vi har ju bara externa förvaltare. Så att vi kommer titta vidare på det här. Det finns möjligheter och begränsningar med koldioxidavtryck, det finns standardiseringsbehov och så vidare. Hur ska man liksom göra antaganden, vilka data ska man välja? Så att det här är både någonting för forskningen och för oss som kapitalförvaltare och titta vidare på. Men jag kan ju nämna när vi har en sån här portfölj just att är det då, jag visade tidigare totalresultatet av vår förvaltning att vi har kunnat dela ut så 3,5 miljarder. Den här portföljen som är 60% mindre avtryck har faktiskt resulterat i år, alltså, eller year to date då, i en avkastning på över 10%. Då är det totalportföljen som är balanserad med räntefonder och annat då. Och det tycker vi är rätt bra faktiskt. Så att då vill jag avsluta innan John sliter ner mig från scen här. Jag ska strax presentera John. Vill jag säga att vi på Mistra, vi tror ju på hållbarhet i kapitalförvaltning. Vi tycker att vi själva har så tydliga exempel på att det har gått bra för oss. Så att det här är något vi mer än gärna för ut till andra. Och med det, I will leave the floor to John Hofskin, who is, jag kan ta det på svenska då, som är generalsekreterare för AP-fondernas etikråd. Dessutom har han en annan funktion, han är också medlem i Mistras kapitalförvaltningskommitté. Tack så mycket.
Very good. I'm going to switch back to English immediately. And thank you very much for having me here today. And thank you for that introduction, Walker. It's a pleasure to be here. We have a great program for you guys today, as you know. It's cut into two pieces. The first piece is going to be in English, basically focusing a bit more on the macro part of this discussion, as I see it. And then the second part is going to be a bit more on the micro part, what actually happens in reality. It's a rather wide topic that we're touching base on today. So we have many issues to raise, and there's going to be a great discussion. I'm going to use you guys out in the audience as well. So be prepared. Prepare your questions, okay? I have quite a few practicalities to go through. Obviously, we have some great speakers. I'm going to introduce them in a very short while. But first of all, the crowd, you guys. I have two people in the crowd I've actually asked beforehand. Cecilia, where do I have Cecilia? I can't see you. So, Cecilia Ripinski, what are your expectations of this afternoon? Yes. There's a microphone on your right-hand side or right-hand side. There you go. Sorry about that. That's practical. That's for all of you. You have microphones on your right-hand side. There you go. Sorry.
Thank you. In the introduction to this day, in the agenda, it says that active management to make a contribution to sustainable development. And I think today, among responsible investors, being an active owner has become common practice. What I'm interested to learn from today is what's next? For example, responsible investors increasingly looking for opportunities that have an impact, a positive, measurable impact in support of sustainable development. For example, by investing in green bonds that support a circular economy, etc. So that's what I'm very interested to learn today, getting some highlights of what comes next within RI.
Perfect, Cecilia. And I'm going to be back to you at the end of the day and see if we've lived up to those expectations. And for those of you who don't know Cecilia, she's our Swedish master of environmental systems and ecosystem services, and she works for Gaia Values. So just to clarify why you're here. And I also asked Annette from SEB the same question here. Annette, the floor is yours. Oh, you have to switch it on.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Really nice to be here. What I'm looking for actually is, have we reached a tipping point right now? Because it seems like sustainable investments are becoming more mainstream. Are we there? And also, what kind of trends are we looking forward? Because obviously the financial markets have a huge responsibility to try and push this forward. So when will the mainstream get this?
Perfect. So now everybody, you've been warned. This is the way we're going to operate today. So you prepare your questions and I'm going to be pushing you out in the audience. Everybody's got microphones. So I'll give you a few practicalities here. In the first session, we're going to have some great speakers. I'm going to introduce them in a while. What's going to happen is you're not going to be allowed to ask questions directly after their presentation. The only one who I will let ask questions is my sidekick today, Mr. Sasha Beslik, who's head of responsible investments and identity at Nordea. Sasha, please come on up. The floor is yours as well.
Much. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, and it's great to have you here, Sasha. So you're going to be my sidekick in this one. He's going to be allowed to have maybe one question, two questions. But I want you guys to write down your questions because we're going to have a panel discussion right afterwards where you'll be able to shoot out immediately. Okay, you're prepared?
Yeah, I'm very prepared. It's
Good.
going to be very interesting.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, nice to be here.
Right, that was the practicalities. Mistra, Åke, where are you at? And we have Måns as well in the audience. 20 years, congratulations. I first stumbled on Mistra 15 years ago during the presentation of the screening of screening companies. I was running a company called Green Index together with a companion, and we were doing a carbon index on the Stockholm Stock Exchange, asking Swedish listed companies about their carbon footprint, together with a Swedish insurance company called Folksam. And I was in the elevator with Måns, and we were talking about this, and Måns told me, well, this is only a list of companies you have, and you have a data on carbon. It's not really that interesting. You actually said something similar like that. The reason why I raise it is that I think this is a very complicated discussion about sustainable markets. We want simple, large-scale solutions. We want regulation, etc., etc. But that kind of simple list with companies and carbon data has actually grown quite big through carbon disclosure programs. And now we're doing a lot of investment decisions based on this data. We have decarbonized indices, we have low carbon strategies, etc., etc. So 15 years later, something that might have seemed quite small and not that relevant has actually grown into something big. And I think we need to carry that along when we talk about the financial markets, because the financial markets is a complicated platform and a complicated tool to get change. So keep that in mind when we have discussions. But once again, congratulations on 20 years. Congratulations, Måns, as well. It's been great. I love working for Mistra. It's a pleasure to be here. Now, David, are you ready? I could make a very long introduction about you, but I'm going to be anecdotal. I saw you in Amsterdam 2004 at the Triple Bottom Line, where you sort of did your first big speech, at least what I perceived to be your big speech, and you were very pleased to be on stage as a keynote speaker about the possibilities for you and generation. And now we have you here 10 years later on as well, and you're very much an integral part of Mistra as well in your story. So I'm going to leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Mistra, for inviting me. I'm going to talk about 4 dates, 1984, 1994, 2004, and 2014, and probably 2015 might sneak in too. I'm going to talk about 4 subjects. I'm going to talk about my own journey to being here today, why we founded Generation 10 plus years ago, what have we learned in these last 10 years, a lot is the answer, and then what is the future and what should we be thinking about, and hopefully that will be useful for our conversation as a panel. So 1984, actually maybe even a little bit before then, 1977, I went to university in America. And I went to university because I wanted to be a teacher. And I started my academic career, and about halfway through it, they discontinued the education department at the university I was going to. So I had to look for a different career as opposed to being a teacher. So I chose child psychology because I thought that was closest to teaching. It turns out that that was the single best degree I could have chosen for my subsequent career of managing fund managers and investment bankers. But I really struggled to get a job when I graduated in 1981, and I actually applied to the Peace Corps and was rejected, which is really hard to do because it's a volunteer organization. Really actually shook my confidence, if I'm honest. Even to this day, I don't really fully understand it. In any event, I was going towards graduating, and my father noticed that I did not have a job. He was quite concerned that I would be coming back home, and he suggested that I try banking. So the first time I thought of joining finance was 1981, simply because I had no other choice. I applied to 70 banks in the United States, was rejected by 69 of them, received 1 yes, and started my career in finance. And sadly for you all, I'm here today. But as I started in finance, I realized that I liked it. And after 2 years working at a company called Bankers Trust, which is no longer in business, and I'll come back to that in a second, I went to business school. And in business school, at the time, and still in many programs, they're 2 years. And so in between your first and second year, you do a summer internship. And I worked at I had decided I wanted to be an investment banker. And I worked at a firm called E.F. Hutton. And I must tell you, it was the single worst summer associate experience you could ever have imagined. I was working from 6 in the morning till 12, 1, 2 in the morning. the business principles or what we were trying to accomplish were not known to me. It seemed that every single financing we did was for tax purposes as opposed to other purposes. There was no sense of culture. There was no sense of teamwork. Everybody seemed to be focused on themselves, and I hated every second of it. So I returned to school and had decided that there would be no chance that I would go stay in finance, and certainly no chance that I would be an investment banker. But as the autumn went on, I kept thinking, well, gosh, that's really too bad, because I thought I liked finance. And so it occurred to me that I had made a mistake, that I did not do enough work in anticipation of learning about the cultures of the organizations, and that if I could just find an organization that matched what I thought was important, then maybe I could find an organization that I could do well at and enjoy. So in 1984, early 1985, I did an analysis of all the major investment banks in the United States, North America, and indeed in Europe. And what I was focusing on was the culture of those organizations, what made them successful, how they organized themselves, the governance, and how people could be successful or not, their business principles, if you will. I realize that today talking about business principles and investment banking seems different and doesn't necessarily make sense, but it did to me in 1984. And I identified that actually Goldman Sachs was the organization that most fit what I thought was important. Their core business principles were written in 1982 by John Weinberg and John Whitehead, and I was fortunate enough to get a job at Goldman Sachs and began my career in finance at that time. But that's not why I tell the story. I tell the story because what happened since then has become very illustrative of why sustainability matters to investing and to business. What I discovered is that the work that I did to understand the cultures of an investment bank or a human capital-based business actually could predict the success of those businesses over time. And since 1985, when I've been in finance, I've seen multiple businesses in investment banking fail. Drexel, Lehman, Bear Stearns, Salomon Brothers, Baring Brothers. The list is really quite long. Kidder Peabody. If you go back and analyze those businesses and why they failed, almost all of them failed for failures of sustainability. Failures of ethics, governance, leadership, incentive structures, failures of culture. Oftentimes we talk about strong cultures. Strong cultures can be bad cultures too. Many of them had strong cultures. Salomon Brothers had a very strong culture, but it turned out to be a poor culture in the end in terms of the success of the organization. So it was that insight coupled with some of my colleagues that caused us to decide that, in fact, setting up a firm that was based on sustainability, and I'll come back to that in a second, could be a really interesting way to analyze businesses and ultimately make investment decisions. Now let's talk about 1994. That, of course, is the founding, more or less, of Mistra and why we're here this afternoon. And I will say that Mistra has an extraordinary important place in Mark Mills, my partner's heart, and I, as well as our other partner, Al Gore, because Mistra was our first institutional client. This was now in 2004. Marta and Mans, I still don't know what you were thinking, deciding to entrust us with managing the important work and the assets of the Mistra Foundation. But it has absolutely been the most important event for us as an organization. And we can't thank you all enough for the support that you showed us and the commitment that you showed us. And thankfully, I think things have worked out pretty well since that time. In 2004, when we started our journey at Generation, we founded the firm based on three sort of fundamental points of view. The first was that long-term investing is best practice. That's still very much true today. That's critical to thinking around sustainability, incidentally. Trading and short-termism is a disease, oftentimes. It's certainly extremely counterproductive to sustainability, broadly speaking. And long-termism is really the perspective on markets that we need to be supporting. And certainly when we write about sustainable capitalism, it always comes back to being long-term versus being short-term. The second observation that we had when we founded the firm was going back to the story around E.F. Hutton, is that we believed, we had no certain proof of it, but we believed that sustainability would drive the long-term success of business. We observed in our own experiences around culture and around human capital management, we observed that other businesses were driven by sustainability factors as well, license to operate, reputation, efficiency, etc. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And we observed in 2004, and certainly observe again today, that the sustainability challenges that the world faces are significant, they're interrelated, and they're getting more acute. Water, climate change, health, demographics, sustainable development, poverty. The list is really quite long. It's all interlinked, and it's becoming ever more significant. And what we observed is the observation that we thought that business, that we thought the government and civil society would be part of the solution, but did not have enough capital or indeed innovation to be the sole solution of these challenges. And so we suspected that we as people would require and expect that business be part of the solution, and that business was recognized that being part of the solution was an opportunity. We also observed, and again, even more so today, that the resource constraints that we all face, and in fact, the observation of how markets have developed, how capitalism has developed, how economies have developed over the last 100, 150 years, that the observation that we had infinite resources was incorrect. The facts are is that we have finite resources, which is beginning to translate into significant transformation of multiple industries. And we're just at the beginning, and I'll come back to that. So we founded Generation because we thought it made sense from a business perspective, because we knew that long-term investing was best practice, and that the context of business was changing and would continue to change. Rolling forward 10 years now to more or less 2014, we had our 10-year anniversary in April. Our investment track record for our first strategy of global equities will be, in fact, in February 1st, so it's nearly a 10-year track record. I seldom like to talk about investment performance, because I've observed over the years that as soon as an investment professional tells you how smart they are, that's exactly the point that performance goes down. So I will not say that, except to say we've been fortunate, maybe we've been lucky, but our track record is pretty good. And that is critical in terms of one of the things we're trying to prove, which is the business case around sustainability. And I will come back to that. But we've learned a lot in these last 10 years around the business case for sustainability. Some of which we've learned, we suspect, is now common knowledge and largely accepted. Some of which we've learned is still to be discussed, and I will conclude with that in a moment. So what have we learned that what more or less people acknowledge, and I think is becoming mainstream? The first is sustainability is an excellent risk management tool. If you can avoid buying businesses, the old adage is in investing is that great investors avoid great mistakes. And we've discovered that the sustainability lens on the quality of business and quality of management has helped us avoid great mistakes. There's no guarantee that we will continue to avoid them, but it's helped us a lot over these last 10 years. If you can avoid investing in a business that dumps a lot of oil into the Gulf of Mexico, that almost always is a good idea. if you can avoid businesses that lose their license to operate because of either their business model or their carbon footprint is unacceptable to communities, that's a good idea. If you can avoid investing in coal companies, as an example, where their business model is in significant transition and the stock goes down 80% this year, that's probably a good idea as a general rule. On balance, reputation matters. Disasters matter in business, and if you can avoid those, that's a good thing. And we have discovered that sustainability is a great lens, and it's not just in equities, actually. It's in every aspect of investing, ranging from fixed income. Of course, in fixed income, it's probably most interesting because, remember, in fixed income, your objective is to get your money back, and hopefully the coupon. If you can avoid really bad outcomes, that usually helps you get your money back. Sustainability is a great tool for that, and true across all the asset classes. So most people would now say that using sustainability at a minimum will help you avoid, not guarantee, but will help you avoid really bad outcomes. The second aspect of sustainability that we think we've learned and we think increasingly is relevant is that we live in a resource-constrained world. That's now clear. And businesses who embrace the resource constraints and are trying to operate their business in a way that either reuses assets or minimizes use of assets tend to perform better, both in terms of their cost base, but oftentimes in terms of their revenue base. And so as we continue down this journey of resource constraints and transition to different types of economies, the extent that businesses can be thoughtful about managing their resources, which of course includes human capital, then almost always that is a good outcome. And thinking about that from a sustainability perspective, asking those questions is a very good lens, a very good tool. The third thing that we've learned, which is still open for many people, probably people in this room as well, is whether sustainability can help you make positive decisions, help you identify great businesses, or because I know that we're going to talk about companies themselves. Companies can use sustainability as a way to drive revenues, profitability, and competitive positioning. We think you can. What we've been able to demonstrate over these last 10 years is identifying great businesses and great management teams that are using their products and services to address sustainability challenges, whether it be climate, whether it be health, whether it be obesity, whether that be poverty, to drive revenues, profitability, and competitive position. So we think sustainability is not a give up. In fact, from the very beginning, we have said that by integrating sustainability into our investment process, we think we can make better investment decisions over time than those who do not. So what about the future? In 2000 and I guess it would have been 2010 probably, Al and I wrote an op-ed in the Financial Times explaining that the financial crisis was in large part due to failures of sustainability and that we had reached an inflection point, that the world would clearly be recognizing that sustainability would be best practice in economies and in business and by extension investing, and that we would see a very rapid transition to more sustainable economies. We were very wrong. By 2011, the concept around sustainability, actually, I think we wrote this in 2009, and then we saw that by 2010, 11, we were very wrong. And we began to discover this when people were saying that we can't be bothered with sustainability now. We can't be bothered about environmental or social governance issues when the world is in dire circumstances. We can't think about climate change now. We have to just worry about jobs, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, we do worry about jobs as a group as well. But what we realized is that we had not been successful in making the business case around sustainability. And so we wrote a paper in 2012 around sustainable capitalism where we tried to make the business case why companies and by extension investors and why economies should be more focused on the long term and recognize that this is a rigorous and thoughtful investment decision, business decision, as opposed to nice to have values-based decision, though we obviously care about values. As we go into 2015, we would say we've made modest progress on making the business case. Probably here in Sweden, more progress. Mistra has been a critical part of this, so has the AP funds, so has a number of the asset managers here who are here today. But in North America, progress has been at best marginal. And it's because we've not really thoroughly convinced people that this is a business discussion. People continue to think that sustainability is nice to have and values-based and really not proper investing. So we have much more work to do to think carefully about why sustainability is best practice and how to describe that and how to prove that much more effectively. And certainly we will in fact write a follow-up paper to a sustainable capitalism paper over the course of the next 3 to 6 months to try to even be more clear in the business case for sustainability, and we welcome everybody and anybody to be part of this debate. It's really quite critical. The second observation around what needs to happen going forward, and you mentioned it in the beginning around impact. For many of us, there is a emerging conversation around impact investing. And whether that is a trade-off for financial results or not, we would argue that you can have great impact and have great returns in many instances, or you could choose to give up some return for impact. The critical component, though, will be measuring and understanding that impact. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done in understanding what we mean by impact. Mistra talked about the impact of its policies on its carbon footprint. That's a good first step, but there needs to be much more sophistication around impact. And lastly, we need to think about the transition to a low-carbon economy. It's happening now. It is certainly happening. It is likely, though, to accelerate quite dramatically over the next 5 years. And we as investors need to think about the risks associated with that transition, as well as the opportunities associated with that transition. We're not yet, I think, fully aware, even those of us who are in this field and thinking about it, we probably underestimate how quickly this will change. When we founded Generation in 2003, 2004, 2020 was 15 years away. And we thought, well, we're beginning, and remember that 2020 is really that first threshold on measuring the flattening of the carbon curve and really bringing it back down to try to stay within 2 degrees Celsius. It's now 2015, or soon to be 2015. 5 years is a very short period of time, but the world is waking up and beginning to realize that we're going to have to move much more quickly. The announcements by China and the US are critical in that, but even more important is the technology and the innovation that we've seen in green finance or in the transition to a low-carbon economy that is making things like solar actually cost competitive in 80% of the world within the next 2 or 3 years. So this is happening. It's a big deal. We don't fully appreciate that, but there are significant opportunities and risks that we have to consider in our portfolios. To conclude, I guess, is to say thank you again to Mistra. There would be no question that were it not for Mistra mandating us really our first outside capital, I doubt very much that we would have been as successful as we've been. We are forever indebted, and we thank you very much.
Hey, you stay. Thank you, David. Excellent.
I don't like this.
No, that's fine.
We're not.
Why is this?
I was saying he was very youngish and energetic in 2004, but I feel you're equally youngish and energetic now. It's great to see, and congratulations on 10 great years, I must tell you, and leadership as well on many of these topics. Question-wise, to keep time, I'm going to lead it to my sidekick to pick one question now, and then we'll pick up on you later on as well, okay?
Thank you very much. It was a fantastic journey, and it's obvious that you've done something that many other asset managers could only dream about. 2 things that I reflected on. One is that you have not mentioned so much incentive models. Incentive models are part of the financial industry's curse and privilege. How will these incentive models, given the long term talking about, need to be changed and give that sort of an extra spark into the mainstream industry in order to find the new ways how to motivate people? And you talk about cultures. In our culture, in our industry, being the asset managers, may be a bit different from the rest of the industries. How will incentive models need to reflect the environmental, social, and governance models, given they will pay off on the long term?
Right. That's a great question, and it's particularly good because I wanted to mention that in my remarks, and I forgot, so thank you. That's the bad thing about not having notes. You sometimes forget stuff, and I did. To me, there are two questions around incentives. One is within the asset management businesses or asset ownership businesses themselves. Unfortunately, today, many of the incentives in financial services, in fact, reward short-term action and actually often inappropriate action, bad action, unethical action. That needs to change. Absolutely needs to change. And we in finance need to be very careful because our license to operate is impaired already, and it easily could become even more significantly impaired. And unless and I may sound defensive because of my prior life, but most folks cannot distinguish between a pension fund, an asset manager, a hedge fund manager, a private equity manager, or an investment banker. We're all in finance. And so we all need to be careful about this. The second point is the models that we have used in finance will probably need to change. So, for example, in private equity, and even indeed in public equity, we have structures and I guess processes that actually are arbitrary. So, for example, in private equity, you tend to have a 5-year fund that then a 5-year workout fund or harvesting period, and then 2 1-year extensions. That's completely arbitrary. No one said, well, most businesses grow that way. That's not, in fact, the case. And as we think about the transition to low-carbon economy, as well as a resource-constrained world, a world where we're actually reusing a lot of products, where we're sharing products, we will need to think of different economic models for sure. And if we can go into this challenge with a clean sheet of paper and fresh eyes, that will serve us all well.
Thank you very much. Just yes and no, quick one, nasty.
Very quick one.
Yes, okay. Is impact investment an Anglo-Saxon trade-off for not including ESG into the mainstream?
No.
Very good. We'll be back to you guys. Okay, thank you once again, David. Thank you.
David.
Down, go.
Yes. So, Helen Winch.
I'll answer to anything, John.
Yeah, Helen, you're Helen for me anyway. Great to have you here. Warm welcome. You're Director of Policy at the Principles for Responsible Investment. You have a background with BT Pension Scheme, which is the biggest pension fund in the UK. You've been working with these issues for 20 years, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, maybe more like 10, actually. Don't overage me.
Yeah, well, a long time. And you're going to tell us about the PRI and where the PRI is right now. So it's going to be really interesting. Absolutely. Well, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Thank you very much, John. Thank you so much, Mr. for inviting me to your lovely country to present. I'm slightly sad there's no snow, but I'm now at the stage where actually I'm hoping there's no snow so I can actually get home. So it's an interesting balance. Great speech. I just thought I'd add to that fact that Goldman's actually rejected me, so it's not, we all have these histories. Right, where's my bleeper? It's here. So I'm going to give you a bit of an update about where the PRI is up to. We've got some interesting figures and statistics now from our first reporting framework, so I will share them with you. It's probably not going to be as interesting as the last speech, but a bit more factual maybe. I'm a figures girl. Right. So I don't know how many people actually know the real history behind the POI, so let me just start with that. Back in 2005, the then UN Secretary General invited a group of large institutional investors, BT Pension Scheme was one of them, to join him in developing an initiative to encourage responsible investing. 10 years later, or just less than 10 years later, the POI signatories represent getting on to 50% of the world's investments. So quite an incredible journey over the last 10 years. A few numbers up here. So we have 2 UN partners, the Global Compact and UNEP-FI. They both sit on our board. We spend a lot of time with them. We do a lot of joint events. In fact, next week in Lima, there's a joint event between the 3 parties. The current number on signatories, and I just had to update this because it's going up so quickly, 1,325, but as I say that, it's out of date. So we're still getting new signatories, which is wonderful. 45 trillion, so I think there's about half of the global number of 100 trillion. I was at a conference in Geneva recently, and someone highlighted that, isn't it incredible we actually don't know how much money is out there? We don't know the value of all the investments. You would think someone would have thought of counting it at some stage. And 6 principles, which are here. I apologise, my slides were a bit, some are scrolling, some are random, so I've kind of mixed them together, so apologies if the animation doesn't quite work. So 6 principles. Very quickly, incorporate ESG, active ownership, seek appropriate disclosure, promote acceptance and implementation, working together and reporting. And I guess it's the 6th principle that I will be talking about today because of the reporting and assessment framework we've just completed. So this is where I get to the charts and the numbers. I hope it's not too dull. So I've said the first part of the presentation, I'll focus on the findings from the 2014 reporting cycle. There's a number of you who would have been through the pain, and I apologise in advance for those who had to complete it. But remember that I had to go through that pain and do it as well when I was at BT Pension Scheme. So probably within the staff of POI, I'm the one who knows and has been through it most of all. And actually, I really enjoyed it because it's a great process. It's an audit process of contacting all your managers and annoying them and saying, how many votes have you done and what have you done and what data do you look at? And you can ask them a few sneaky extra questions without them noticing as well. And I always found it was quite a good process to go through. So let's look at the numbers. So the first question I always think is, hang on, 814, I've just said there's over 1,300 signatories. Why are those numbers so different? 2 reasons. At the moment, we only ask the asset managers and the investment managers, the asset owners and the investment managers to report. Service providers at the moment somehow escape, and we'll work out how to catch them. Additionally, when you join the POI, you have 18 months, depending on the cycle, of time to get your responsible investment practices in order, and so you don't have to report. So that's why there's a difference in the numbers. But actually, all those that had to report did report. Now, we were slightly concerned. It's quite a big framework. It's very transparent. It's mandatory. We thought a number of people who had been complaining about the process would not complete the framework. Absolutely did. So the timing for the market on people to report and to be transparent about their actions is very much here and has very much been accepted by the industry. And we're very excited by that. You can see the global spread of the signatory base. So you can see the domination of Europe, America, Australia, which is very much where the founding members of the POI are. As David said, yes, the impact that responsible investment has had in the States has been minimal at best. We still have a lot of the pension schemes and corporate pension schemes who tell us it's against our regulation to do this. And partly because of that, over the next 12 months, we will do some work on fiduciary duty, especially with ERISA. We do now have our first US corporate pension scheme who's got round ERISA in joining, so the Unilever pension scheme. So we feel there's a very much excitement, there's the opportunity there. Also, Asia is a bit of a gap at the moment. Every time I go anywhere near anyone who's got a UN label with them, they point out that you can't be global without Asia. And I absolutely agree, and we're very aware of that. Right, so what did we find? Let's have a look at some of the numbers. And I'll just do a bit of a plug. So there is this wonderful book. It is a bit of a tome, but it's a great reference piece. Report on Progress. It's on the internet. If you want some hard copies, give us a shout. We can send some to you. So how widespread is responsible investment activity? Remember, this is within our signatories. This isn't a look at everybody. So this is approximately 50% of probably the most active players. So this slide goes through asset class by asset class, what signatories reported. And we differentiate between those who manage in-house and those who delegate to asset managers. And that whole conversation we just had about incentive structures, we'll come to that a bit more, but it's kind of that interaction between those parties with the asset owners, really the clear representatives of the beneficiaries, is one that the POI spends a lot of time focusing on. So the top line, just to explain to you what's going on in this kind of slightly weird chart. So top line, which is A, is 437 responses by signatories on listed equity incorporation. So this is basically suggesting that over 80% of signatories say they are doing something on incorporation, and I'll define that term and the different types of incorporation we look at later. The yellow bar there, which is what, I don't know, 5-6%, is signatories who say they're doing something but not comfortable enough to report, and we do have a little bit of flexibility on that. And then the blue is signatories who say we're not doing anything. So only 5% of signatories are saying in listed equities we're doing absolutely nothing. Now the question, of course, kind of, if you're a member of the POI, the chances are you are doing something. So to a certain extent, who knows which leads which. But as you go further down the chart there, so line B, which is listed equity engagement, again, I think a great number. Over 60-70% of people are doing something on engagement. Now, of course, the one thing that POI framework doesn't bring out is, and I can see a few people shaking their heads saying, absolutely, we don't know how much engagement. They might have phoned one company. They might have engaged with everybody in their portfolio. At this stage, with our framework, we don't know this. And this is obviously extra work that we need to do. We already have 228 indicators in our framework. I think if we had any more, we'd kind of get shot. So we need to work out different ways to get some more granularity and more quality reporting out of some of these indicators. But you can see the story goes down, the equities, and then we, at E, F, G, and H, we move into bonds. So I think bonds is a really interesting asset class. At BT Pension Scheme, when I started, we had 60% in public equities. By the time I left, we had 30%, and we had 40-50% in corporate bonds. And I used to ask the question most days, so we're doing all this RI, all this stewardship in public equities, but actually we're doing nothing on our bonds. What can we do? Such a dominant force in our portfolio. So I was one of the ones that encouraged the POI. I don't think they'd call it encouragement. I probably beat them up quite badly. I was the one who was encouraging the POI to really look at bonds, and we now have 3 very good guidance documents on the beginnings of a journey of how you integrate ESG into fixed income. The fixed income module on the reporting assessment is voluntary at the moment, which is why the numbers are quite low. But again, you can see people are beginning to do things. And the bottom 2 numbers there, G and H, are government bonds. So people are thinking about ROI even within their government bond portfolios, which is very encouraging. Now, the next slide is non-listed assets. So there is obviously a difference between something that's listed where you have very clear ownership structure, you have the legal framework of an asset class, and then in comparison to a non-listed asset, so private equity, property infrastructure, sometimes the structure actually is better because you have a smaller number of clients in a portfolio, you have a more long-term structure. So in many cases, the asset classes are structured better, so you can do responsible investing better. And I think because of that, you can see the private equity, which is the top line there, the reporting numbers are great. Over 60% of investors within private equity are doing things. And I think that's a really good representation. I think we have a great working group on private equity, and people are really thinking about this in the way they make decisions and the way they're managing their portfolios. So we're very encouraged with that. Property, again, is a very interesting asset class, and in many countries has real regulation about energy efficiency, measuring carbon emissions, measuring waste that comes out of property. And this is obviously motivating people to think about this asset class. Sitting at the bottom is infrastructure, which is not only incredibly difficult to define, it can be fixed income, it can be a private equity fund, it can be direct, it can be PFI. So it encompasses such an enormous number of assets, and we're still really trying to get our head round to properly define it. So that was the numbers specifically on how people reported their activities within asset classes to us. Now, for me, some of the numbers in this chart are the ones that kind of concern me the most, yet give us the opportunity for what to do next. So if you think about how an asset manager and an investment manager, an asset owner and investment manager interact, the beneficiaries mandate the asset owner either directly or kind of indirectly to invest the money, usually for the long term or indefinitely. The asset owner then has to give a mandate to the investment manager to invest the funds. Now, what's in that mandate? There's a legal contract. How does the asset owner choose the investment manager? And then how do they monitor it? There's 3 very clear parts of that process. And at the BT Pension Scheme, we spend a lot of time thinking about these 3 different processes. So it's been very interesting to see how that's followed through into the reporting framework. So a couple of numbers to pick up on this. The top line, which talks about the selection process. So do asset owners discuss the manager's governance and management on RI activities? Great outcome, 78%. So a good majority of asset owners, when they're talking to the investment managers, talk about this. 26% of a specific weighting to ESG factors in manager evaluation. Now, I know a lot of the local authority funds are mandatory to do that, but unfortunately, it's not as common practice as it could be. So that's an area for improvement. And then as you get through into the mandate area, so general activities in accordance with your organisation's investment beliefs or RI policy. So as an asset owner, do people reference their RI policy or their investment beliefs in a mandate? We used to do it. We used to staple on the back of our mandates, please read our investment beliefs when you're making investments, but not really anything too firm. So 48%. That's almost half. I think that's quite good. The next 2 numbers really concern me. So requirements relating to voting, 24%. So that means in 3/4 of mandates, there is no comment about how a manager should vote on behalf of the asset owner. So that's a 2-way discussion. Each side hasn't asked or been told. And in an area where stewardship and voting is so important, so how are these decisions being made? Who's guiding them? And then even more concerning, 11% include any sort of legal definition or direction on engagement. 11%. That means there's 89%. See, I'm a good mathematician. Don't ask their managers how they want them to engage. Looking further towards, again, on the monitoring, relatively good numbers that people in their meetings with their managers do ask about RI as a standard. So that at least is good. Although we used to have situations that, going back to BT Pension Scheme, where the manager selection team would, at the end of a meeting, kind of walk out and say, well, they didn't bring up RI. It's obviously not integral into their investment process. And the manager's sitting there going, I'm not going to bring it up. They might think I'm some weird SRI fund who isn't maximising returns. So you have this really interesting kind of this conflict no one wants to bring up, the elephant in the room. So we should definitely all be encouraged, go into your meetings. The first question is, what do you do on RI? How are you thinking about climate change? You might find it revolutionises some of these meetings. Okay, I better go quicker. So specifically on some of these gaps, we've looked at long-term mandates. So we have a discussion paper that's up on the internet now, which talks about some of these questions. How do you have a better contract between an asset owner and an investment manager? How do you talk about engagement? How do you talk about long-termism? Do you give them a specific target on turnover? Is that enough? Is that actually completely the wrong thing to mandate someone on? So do go and have a look and read the documents, and we will be producing a firm guidance paper in the new year with lots of case studies about how various managers and various asset owners, such as New Zealand Super, look at long-termism. So thinking a bit more about that word integration and consideration of RI into investment practices. What do we mean by integration? Well, there's three main common terms of integration. There's screening, which is typically something like cluster bombs or tobacco. Thematic, where you're specifically looking at something like renewable energy as an investment proposition. Or integration, which, as you can see from here, is the most common. So that's considering the ESG factors in your decisions. And actually, I did a Nordic cut for the audience because I thought you might find it interesting. So the far left-hand side, I had to put all the Nordics together just so you kind of couldn't see too much specifics. Now, it's a really interesting chart, I'm sure you'll agree, to see that the kind of some of the countries are nominally ahead of the Nordics, whereas we all think the Nordics are leading. I suspect a lot of this is about the reporting is probably taken more seriously here. It is defined at a higher level. And it also bears that question about we need to go back and do some work on the definitions and quantities. I might flick away from that before you start looking too closely at it. The other thing that's interesting that I will mention is you can see the effect of legislation. So in Netherlands, 94% screening. They have very firm legislation on screening on cluster bombs. The France is more about stewardship, is where people tend to think about. France, you have the Grenelle laws, which talk very much about disclosing how you integrate ESG. So I think you can really begin to see the impact of regulation. Bit more detailed, the methods of integration, so economic analysis, industry analysis, company strategy. Do you use it for idea generation, portfolio construction, fundamental analysis? And you can begin to see the drivers and the different areas. And actually, these subjects are from our paper called Integrated Analysis, which is a great one when you're asking an investment manager what kind of ways are they integrating ESG. So specifically on my area on policy, we asked a question about what are signatories doing in public policy. So from here, 75% of people responded to what is a voluntary question. And 42% of signatories said that, yes, they are active in policy, which personally I think is great. But the most common action is endorsing someone else's written submission. And some work we've done recently highlights that actually face-to-face meetings, as you can kind of guess, is the best way to have a policy engagement rather than writing. Also, there's a lot more work to be done on encouraging transparency of signatories in public policy, especially when we're thinking about talking to companies on how they act in lobbying governments on climate change. We can't ask them to be transparent and consistent when investors aren't doing as much as they can. And a bit more about what we're doing on public policy. We just published last week a paper on the case for investor engagement in public policy, really trying to encourage asset owners and investment managers to be a bit more active in policy discussions. So often I hear from the Commission is, actually, we'd love to have done this legislation, but the company said no, and there was no investors to say yes, so we didn't do it. So there's a lot of money in investments. There's probably a lot of money in this room. So it is part of the responsibility to be up there and setting the scene for regulation. So a bit more about my work plan. So these are the three documents that we're looking at. So the long-term mandates under the investment governance arena, the public policy paper, and the RI quarterly, which I've got another slide on with some nice pictures. There we are. I quite like that one. So we've done 5 RI quarterlies. The idea is that to take a series of academic research, which no one in their right mind would read because it's 40, 50 pages long appendixes, lots of equations and numbers that you really can't work out unless you have a PhD yourself. And so how can we take academic research and really get people acting on it? The thing I always say to academics is you want the CIO of CalPERS to pick this up and react to it in the way that they invest. So the 5 papers, the first one was on loans, second one on fiduciary duty, third on long-termism, fourth on climate. The 5th was a summary of the academic papers we presented at our conference in Montreal. And volume 6 that will come out in the new year is about PRI's role in research. I'd also encourage endowments to join the POI. We've recently had Harvard, University of California, and Edinburgh University Endowment join the POI, and we're thinking of building a group of the endowments so they can share conversations and work plans they're doing, specifically on the divestment campaign that a lot of them are being targeted by, and they'd like to know how to respond. So that's what we're trying to create, moving from awareness to impact. And with that, I will finish. Thank you very much.
Wow. Excellent.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Helen.
If I go this way, do I not get quizzed?
No, you come here and you're going to stand between the two of us again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very interesting presentation on PRI. It's a fantastic organization. It's been going on for some time.
Yep.
We are signatories as many other people sitting here.
Yep.
We are very happy to be part. But looking at the numbers and looking at the business model that many of us run and seeing the growth going on the, as we call it, emerging markets, the numbers in some of these places are staggering when it comes to the asset owners.
Yep.
5 in Africa, 0 in Middle East, and 5 in Asia.
Yep.
And we all know that asset owners and the mandate we get from the asset owners is very important for us when it comes to integration, engagement, screening. And the numbers that you show, 26%, on really integrating this into a mandate evaluation is very important. So how will you get more asset owners from this part of the world to participate? It's very important going forward for PRI to get the emerging markets on board.
It's something that I kind of think about most days, I must admit, because the big asset owners out there are the sovereign wealth funds.
Yeah.
And having been on boards with sovereign wealth funds in some of our investments at BT, they would turn up, but actually they weren't engaged and they wouldn't vote. And they thought it was, from a cultural point of view, they didn't want to interfere in the running of the company. But the way that UK governance, and I'm sure most of European governance works, is predicated on having active owners in companies. And so you have this awful standoff and this incompatibility between the sovereign wealth funds and the way that we do business in Europe. So we're talking to the government pension fund in Japan. They will have a conference with them in May. We have the MPS in Korea. And I want to try and do some work in China with CIC, Genco Tree, those kind of the big Chinese investors. I know they won't fill in the transparency. Why would they tell us how big they are when they don't tell anybody else? But I feel it's almost a higher level Secretary General conversation we need to have on how we solve this problem and how we obviously have to move as well. We have to allow them to understand the way of the West and understand our governance, but at the same time, we have to be very aware of their cultural reasons for investing and doing things the way they are. We've seen the massive impact from the GPF in South Africa and the fantastic market they have in South Africa, the CRISA Code and the King Code working together with both sides having responsibilities. And I'd love to take that model to other African as well as other emerging markets. And just quickly on the flip side of that, we're doing some work with various UN agencies on the Sustainable Development Goals, which personally I think are incredibly consistent with the POI. And actually, if you take to extreme your ESG integration, you probably are looking at sustainable development. So it's a case of bringing those two worlds closer together, trying to think about the investment opportunities that exist in emerging markets and bring them to some of the big investors from the north and facilitating that north-south invest. Now, I'm hoping by answering in a long way, I won't get any more questions.
No, you won't. As the Secretary General, no. Sorry, not this time. We're running short on time.
Okay.
And we'll be back to you when you get on the panel. Sorry about that, my sidekick.
I had a good one.
So, Claes, dreadfully sorry, we're running over a bit time. I could speak for half an hour about your background. I'm not, but I'm going to mention to everybody that you are on the board of Mistra and you work with me. I have the pleasure of working with you in the Capital Committee as well. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Off you go, sir.
John, can you hear me?
You have to put it on.
It's on, I hope.
Ska jag kolla?
Check my backside. Check it. Off you go. Okay, thank you. I can't hear myself, but I hope you can hear me.
Is it on?
No, it's not on.
No.
I don't think it's on.
No.
It's on.
It is.
Well, är den på? Okay, I'll speak. Never mind. Thank you, John, anyway, and thank you, David and Helen. After listening now to a personal journey and some detailed numbers and graphs, you'll get as Monty Python says, something completely different. I'll be very fluffy. I'll talk about general principles for making the financial sector more sustainable and how it can help creating sustainability in the long run, not like this. The financial sector is both a villain and a hero, of course. The financial sector can help us grow in a good way. It creates efficiency, income, but, as you know, it also can create bubbles and financial crises. It has the power and the funds, and now I can hear myself, and the money to invest or fund investments to change technology into greener, more sustainable technologies. But it also can be very myopic, once again creating short-termism, maybe financial crises. Looking at the financial sector today, and I will skip a number of slides because somebody stole my time, obviously the financial sector can do lots of things, or need to do a lot of things. The financial sector need to be changing in a sustainable way, not only when it comes to environment and climate, but as David said, also when it comes to taking a longer-term view of investments and the cyclical swings in general in society, in order to combat the financial crisis, unemployment and inequality. The financial sector needs to change. But the financial sector is crucial when it comes to transforming the economy for the better in an environmental sense. We know that the necessary investments are going to be huge over the next decades. I'll show you some figures in a moment. That's going to be funded via the financial sector. We're going to need more emissions rights trading in a good way, not the way that the ETS has worked. That has to be done via the financial sector. If we don't only look at mitigation, but also at adaptation, we need well-working insurance solutions through the financial sector once again. The financial sector, including the banks, need to revamp their credit strategies, their ownership strategies, in order for them to make their lending sustainable. I'll come back to that. And then, of course, we need to shape up when it comes to analysis and knowledge about all these things. Otherwise, we will not be able to function. So there are huge tasks ahead of us in the financial sector. And if we don't live up to this, there will be no sustainable transformation in the economy as a whole. Looking at the numbers, this is from recent OECD sources. When they try to calculate the kind of investment sums that are necessary over the next couple of decades to move to a more sustainable economy, they land in a total area of about $100 trillion. That's $100,000 billion. Now, that's not the only way of looking at things, though, because you might think of this as a gross number. It's hugely big, and you sort of have to take it from zero. But that's not the correct way of looking at things, of course, because even if there's no green transformation and we continue business as usual, there will be huge investments. They will not be as good, they will not be as beneficial, but they will be there anyway. And if you compare sort of the green transformational investments with those that would take place in a business as usual scenario, then the situation looks quite different. This is from the new Climate Economy Report, which you probably, most of you have seen. If not, download it and read it because it's quite good. Their calculation says that the base case is about 90, and then you add the different sort of changes that we have to do if the base case is to be turned into green case. And then, of course, there's hardly any net additions at all. The point is that if you can make the investments that would go into fossil fuel instead go into non-fossil, they would be greener, but the net new cost would not be as big as all. I think this is a very sort of productive way at looking at these numbers, because if you just look at the sort of total numbers, not taking into account that you need to subtract the base case, then the task looks overwhelming. However, this is easier said than done, though, because for us, the financial sector, to move in this direction and to make the context of investments greener, we need help. I don't think it's feasible unless politicians do a number of things. For the financial sector to change these investments and to fund green investments, we need long-term commitment from the policy side. We need very clear signals about long-term relative price changes, i.e. fossil fuels should become more expensive, renewables less expensive. So we need clear signals about what taxes and subsidies will hold, in the best case globally, but at least nationally. We need cap and trade systems that can be trustable, once again, not like the European system. And we need to know what kind of regulations that will sort of add to the relative price signals that come. We need private-public partnerships for investment, not least in public infrastructure. We need more R&D, of course, to let's call it climate and energy and environmental issues in total. We need foreign aid to the less developed countries or the emerging markets. And not least, from a macro point of view, since I'm a macroeconomist, we need to change the GDP measurements. Now, that's slowly happening with the Eurostat, the OECD, the World Bank, and others working on new measurements of beyond GDP. But it'll probably take, when I talk to Statistics Sweden, they say it'll take another 10 years. But we will eventually be there. Now, if all these jigsaw puzzle pieces come into place, then I think you can actually make it quite credible that the net cost to society of this transformational change is positive. Negative. There will be no cost. It will actually be a gain. I know this is difficult to read. Once again, it's from the same source. The point here is, of course, that negative numbers is negative cost. And the point is here, this is what we add in costs in investing in renewables. But we gain because costs of fossil fuels will diminish. We have the same thing in financial costs. This is sort of operational costs. This is financial costs. The point here is that you have net gains, both in amortization and operating expenses and in net financial benefits over there. And here, of course, you have added or subtracted the stranded costs, or cost of stranded assets. If you get these credible changes of relative prices, then a number of investors will draw the conclusions that they should not invest in fossils because fossil assets will not be worth what they seem to be worth today. They will be stranded assets. And if you take all these things into account, actually the calculation ends with a huge benefit, not only in general terms, but also on bottom line terms. This is not happening today. It'll take some time, it'll take some years, I don't know how much, but I think most financial investors and financial sector people are looking at this, starting to learn, starting to understand, and gradually sort of preparing for this new situation. And we do that in different ways in different companies. I work for a bank. We are the fathers or mothers, if you want to, of the green bond. We're very proud of that. It's been in existence now for, 7 years. And we are still the world leaders, despite the big dragons gradually coming into this market. I think the green bond concept will develop in many different ways. I can say that we are working on making it also into a retail product with much smaller scale, possible to use in many, many different kinds of sectors and projects which are not possible to have green bonds today. But I think maybe even more important for banks is that we change our credit policies and our ownership strategies. This is what we're doing, and I think most banks are doing the same, albeit in slightly different ways. We lend, we give credits to companies, to projects, whatever. And what we're doing now is that we're going through our entire portfolio of credits. In a number, I guess the fonts are too small here, but we sort of checked up the sensitive sectors. And for each of these sectors, we have child labor, climate change, freshwater, arms and defense, forestry, fossil fuels, mining metals, renewables, and shipping. In all these areas, we now have new rules and regulation for ourselves, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. Of course, PRI is part of this, but there are a number of other things as well, including our own targets, which sometimes are higher, sometimes are lower than perhaps some of you have. This is a sort of moving target, but I think most banks are now sort of into this, working with this, setting up the way we should behave as good citizens. Not only sort of negative screening, taking out a number of projects, but also sort of supporting different kinds of projects. We have, I can't tell you exactly which, but we have said no to a number of projects that some of our clients have wanted to finance with credits from us, and we had said no because you don't fit into our sustainability strategy. And that sends a clear signal, and we see changes, we hope to see changes in some of our clients' behavior. Now, looking ahead with the kind of new calculations and the new sector policies that many banks are working on, I'm sure we'll see a lot of sort of business opportunities. Someone mentioned, Åkes mentioned the circular economy, which of course, children have many names, but the idea that you start with zero waste from the outset, more companies will move to a production or business strategy where organic waste can be reused in nature and non-organic waste can be circulated, recirculated and reused again. I guess we have our colleague from Volvo here. You might mention this after the break. I hope so anyway, because you're involved in one of the Mistra projects working exactly with this. That leads me over to say something quickly about Mistra, since I'm on the Capital Allocation Committee. Of course, what we have to do is to be stable as investors. We have to see to it that the capital lives. It doesn't have to be eternal, because our founders set up Mistra for being sort of should have a lifespan. We thought then about 20 years or so. It will be longer now, maybe perhaps another 15 years, because our capital is now bigger than it was when Mistra was started, despite the fact that we had spent so much on research, thanks to the stock market. But we also need a long-term horizon, obviously. We need to have a sustainable profile, meaning, for instance, a low CO2 footprint, which Åke told you about. We are cutting down those investments who have fossil fuels in them one way or the other, and they're now an extremely small part of our portfolio. We need to be very transparent in what we're doing. Åke mentioned, in a sense, that I think it's important that we also want to be a leader and a role model and stimulate sustainable investments. One way of doing this is engaging with those who are handling our money, like Generation, and we sort of pick investors and asset managers and try to communicate with them and have an impact through voice rather than exit. I think we've been successful so far. We could have done even better, perhaps, but I think we can be proud of what we've done for the past 20 years as asset allocators. One of the projects which Åke mentioned was also try to have an impact in a broader sense on economic research and the role of financial research in society. Sorry about the Swedish here, but we have just handed out, or we're going to hand out, 55 million Swedish crowns to the Stockholm School of Business, Stockholm School of Economics, for a new program which will create a center for sustainability research in economics. And that will be hopefully quite productive and yield a number of conclusions for financial markets, theoretical and practical, for the future. I know time is running out. Let me finish with sort of a very speculative end to this presentation. If the financial markets will succeed in doing all this, the financial markets will actually transform capitalism as a system, as a whole. Capitalism is quite flexible. It's gone through, I would say, 3 phases in the West. The laissez-faire phase of Adam Smith crashed in 1921. Then the Keynesian decades, which stagnated in the 70s and 80s. And then the Friedman, free-roaming financial capitalism version, which crashed in 2008. And what we're looking for, at least what I'm looking for, and many of you too, I assume, is some kind of new capitalism which is more inclusive, more sustainable, and where companies behave in a responsible way. I am pretty sure too that the next wave, the long wave, I actually wrote my dissertation on this about 100 years ago, the long waves of capitalism, a la Kondratiev and Schumpeter. Of course, this is stylized. It doesn't look like this. But I believe actually that the long-term, well, not cyclical, but long-term swings depend on secular technological breakthroughs. And of course, it doesn't look like this in reality, but here you have the steam engine. This is the train. Here comes the internal combustion engine and electrical engine, broken by depression and wars. And here you have the sort of maturization of these previous technologies, and then the stagnation. And then you have the IT revolution, and this is where we are today. I believe that it's possible to get good growth, inclusive and green growth, with new technologies in energy, renewables, in urban planning, because the biggest investment program in the history of mankind is the urbanization. We could talk about our urbanization program in India and China and other countries. And I think actually that if the financial sector can transform itself, we can be instrumental in shaping this new long wave of a greener capitalism. Thank you, sir.
Yes, off we go. Come on, guys. David, Helen, thank you very much, Claes. Excellent. Let's leave that one up on the scoreboard, and we'll start. And I'm going to be back to you, so I hope everybody's prepared your questions. Just some rules and regulations. If you have questions specifically for someone, you ask specifically. And if you have general questions to the whole board, you just ask them about that. But I've asked Sasha to actually prepare the first question so we get going.
I have one question that I often think about in our industry in particular, and that goes a little bit back to what you're doing together with Mistra today. The systemic issue of the financial industry is that educational modules that we still use in all of the business schools all around the world are based on the model, financial economic model, where externalities are something from another planet, not evaluated in the models. We have issues, systemic issues, with people coming into our business from business schools, not knowing much about sustainability or environmental or social issues and so on. Isn't it so that one of the things that we really need to focus on is to rebuild or broaden the scope of the educational model? Because we get the problem, I mean, not problems, but we get the things into the system, we get the people outside the system, then we need to reconvince them that the business case for sustainability actually exists, because they've been they've been taught for 4 years or 5 or 6 that that's not the case. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking about the educational side of this. How important is that?
Long term, it's important, and of course, I think the world as a whole and the financial research needs a paradigm shift. It might be on its way. I think it's slower than I thought it would be, going back to 2008, 2009. I thought it would come quicker, but it's a huge undertaking. I hope that what we do with the Stockholm School of Economics might push the boundaries a little bit, but you do see, I mean, it's not as simple as saying that we just have sort of supply-demand curves. And I mean, the financial research is now broadened to a very large extent. A very large extent is about internalizing externalities, about asymmetrical information, about not very professional agents, things like that. So things are changing, but they're changing slowly. And I hope that some of us can help push that development a little bit further, because I agree, we need to change the way the models look, the basic models.
I'm going to pose you a tricky one. I mean, you're behind one of the most famous and popular economics books that are being used by schools in Sweden. Do you have any segments on green sustainability in that one?
Yes.
Good. I was just double checking you. Anybody else on that topic?
Double check him?
Yeah, no, you can double check him if you want. But on education, on education.
I completely agree, and the one bit of good news is increasingly, and I look around the room here, there's not that many folks who are 21 or less, or 22, but we find that the folks who are coming out of university now have a much different perspective and are expecting that the organizations they work with will have different values and more appropriate values. So I'm actually confident that the younger folks will help us make this transition, will help them make the transition in the universities as well.
We're doing quite a lot of work. Oh, I think I've done this.
Yeah, on it goes in.
Through the RY Quarterly, we're doing quite a lot of work with kind of taking academics who are writing on this level and disseminating, as I mentioned, and also with the Academic Network Conference, we're trying to encourage not only professors but also up-and-coming MSc students to actually consider doing work on responsible investing rather than more mainstream. I've also been very encouraged with organisations like the CFA, who really are in charge of kind of educating the next generation of CIOs, and they're beginning to put responsible investment into their curriculum. I think we can all encourage people. In Montreal, we had a panel of professors as well as asset owners and investment managers. And someone there said, lobby your dean. And I think it's a great expression. So everybody's been to university, go back and encourage them to think about this.
Okay, good. I'm going to open up. We've got about 5, depends on how much of the coffee break we're going to steal, about 5-10 minutes to go. Do we have any questions? Christina, I saw you were, and you have to introduce yourself. See if you get the microphone working as well.
Hi, I'm Kristina Hillesøy from Länsförsäkringar, a Swedish insurance company. There's a big debate, of course, of stranded assets here in Sweden as well as elsewhere in the world. Divesting from stranded assets seems to be the easiest way, but what about engagement? Is it possible? What is your view? Is it really possible to engage with the fossil fuel companies, and will they really change?
Oh, well, that's a tricky one. Everybody was looking at me, and I'm not going to respond to that one. Does anybody else want to respond to that one?
Yeah, to some extent it is, but it's depending on their own dependency of the type of the fossil fuels they're actually working with. If you have a coal company with 98% of revenues coming from the coal mining, the opportunity for them to change a business model is probably very small. So you may engage as long as you want, but I think it's depending on what type of the industry. And I don't think it's black and white in that aspect that you just need to sort of walk away and stop investing in some of them. It's engagement as a mean, as a tool, I think is an option, but I wouldn't say that it works in all cases.
I don't want to harass you, but in the AP fund system, there are obviously very different views.
Yep.
Yeah, one of the AP funds saying, we'll take this fight. And you have another saying, we will not. And then you have some in between. So it's an open question how this will go. We don't really know yet.
I think one of the issues with divestment is in this market of supply and demand, someone's got to buy that coal company that someone's selling, and it depends who are those buyers, and at some stage those assets will become so cheap that the annual revenue that's coming from creating this coal and selling it on is going to be great, even if you just run your model for 3 to 5 years. So I think we just have to be very careful about the impact that divestment makes. Does it actually put up internal rates of return or not, or does it just mean that there's other owners of that? Engagement, I think it can achieve some things. And if we think back to these POI numbers that in theory POI signatories own 50% of some of these companies, if there's enough collaboration and joint engagement, in theory, there should be enough asset owner and company pressure that things can change. And we've heard some story where strategies are beginning to transition towards a low carbon economy.
I think just to end this discussion, we had a big discussion in London last week regarding this, and one of the takebacks was actually that be cautious, because what you divest, your hedge funds might end up buying it at the tail. So you have to check your hedge funds as well, because they're absolutely looking at coal at the moment. So if you have a proper strategy, be cautious what happens in both directions. Okay, more questions yes, please introduce yourself as well.
My name is Helen Ballman, and I work for the Swedish Agency for Economic and Regional Growth. I seem to be the only person from an agency here today. Anyhow, what Claes Eklund is saying, I think it's most interesting, because you're talking about long-term responsibilities, political ones, right, with subsidiarities and tax regulations that can be steady for a long time. I just wonder who from the industry side, from the finance sector, is actually giving these important points up to the government, even though we have a very unsteady government for the moment. And by the way, just the last thing, I think that Coach Eklund, whatever government we get, you should be actually an advisor to that government on these issues. Yeah. You should be absolutely excellent. Thank you.
I'm not sure about that one, but that's your opinion. Okay.
Actually, I am an advisor. Was both the last government and this shaky government we have right now. So.
All right.
Well, was it a question for me?
I think so. No, I don't. But there is no real industry spokesperson in this issue.
No, it's not. Unfortunately.
It's a question of a number of companies and a number of analysts who sort of push the envelope, but I think the main pressure on the politicians right now so far has come from NGOs, media, normal people, the voters. But I think that the situation might be gradually changing. After Copenhagen, with the fiasco there, and things haven't improved that much. Sure, there is a deal, whatever it is, between Obama and Xi Jinping right now, but we don't really know what it's worth. But I do see a number of companies sort of moving ahead faster, and also telling the government that if you really want change, you need to do all these things. So there's pressure on governments from both sides. But on the other hand, as we all know, in a financial crisis with slow growth, there's also pressure from the opposite side. Look at the US coal industry, for instance. This is a race with time, in a sense. My point is simply that you cannot really expect the financial sector as a whole to do all these necessary things unless it is helped and pushed by the political sector.
But it needs volumes. And there is one thing that she takes up that I think we should discuss in this context, and that's long term. What is long term? What is long term in the financial industry? What is long term in the asset owner industry? I mean, it's so interesting to discuss this, because when you talk about long term, the trends that you're looking at on our 10, 15, 20, 35 years. We are evaluated on a monthly, sometimes yearly basis, quarterly. If you want to talk long term, then we need to change the mandates and what we are evaluated on. And this is a systemic issue for our industry. And I think that's important to discuss when we talk about long. What do we actually mean by that?
Yeah, and I think that's something you guys at Generation has been actually, you asked for a really long-term mandate. Yeah. And that's actually quite honestly asking for a lot, but you've been able to handle it as well. What's your experience on that discussion?
The time frame that our clients have given us is our single most important competitive advantage. I completely agree with you. Our clients have given us 3 to 5 years to prove our skill, and that has given us an opportunity to make some decisions that we know our colleagues or competitors in the asset management industry are not able to make. So we're very clear that that is absolutely the most important thing we have going for us. And then, of course, if you couple that with the thinking around sustainability and partner that, it becomes a very powerful tool from an investing perspective. But I completely agree, time frame matters a lot. And if you're evaluating managers on a short-term basis, you're really evaluating traders, and that's very different than investing.
Okay, I can see that people are getting the sort of I need coffee eyes. And I totally respect that. I do that as well. But Lynn, you want to go for a question? And please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you. My name is Lynn Lurpold. I'm at the Stockholm School of Economics. So I thought there were some really good questions, and I'm also thankful for really interesting presentations. I was wondering, not so much on the long term, but we talk about the business case for sustainability. We talk about incentive systems. I see Klaus with the slide here about the next wave. Aren't we all working as actors within, making the best, most sustainable within a very faulty system here? Where do those discussions that the system we have, sure, we'll find the business case, but in its sense, the business case is a mantra within the current faulty system that we have, in a sense. So you're already talking to the current problem. How do we solve the big issues here?
We are within the system. I don't think there's any other way. We have to work within the system, the existing system. There is no other system we can work within. I mean, it sounds like a banal statement, but in my youth, once again, 100 years ago, I was a Trotskyite. Many people in my generation were out. That was the fringe, the far left fringe. And we discussed, changing the system. But the problem, and I read, for instance, Naomi Klein's book on climate change. But I think that argument is faulty, because if you need to change the system first and then start to work, then we've lost the fight against climate change, because we don't have time to wait. We have to work within this system, whether it's faulty or not, warts and all. There is no other system to work within. Maybe I misunderstood your question, but we have to discuss the system as well, of course, but we have to do changes to our business models and the relative prices here and now in this system.
But you yourself referred to Schumpeter and creative destruction. Yeah. If all the companies become sustainable businesses with the sustainability links, where do we grow? How can we continue to grow in that way?
first of all, the definition of growth will change.
Yes.
Yes.
Importantly. And secondly, you can have in a zero growth economy, you could have lots of businesses that are growing, lots of businesses that aren't growing. So it's both.
Okay, everyone. We could.
We have presents.
I think we could continue this discussion for a very, very long time. For a very long time. But I know we're going to need coffee. We have a great session after the coffee break as well. It's this time of the year here in Stockholm that we give away the Nobel Prize. Your friend Al has got one in real life at home. You can have this chocolate one, and you can compare it with Al's, I was going to say, and you can say mine is actually better looking and better tasting than yours is. So thank you very much for joining us. Pleasure to have you here. Thank you, Helen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bra, toppen.
Bra jobbat.